On June 17, 2006, a 17-year-old girl named Madison Reeves disappeared in the Atchafalaya swamps of Louisiana. She had set out on a day hike with 3 friends to watch birds, a popular outing in that part of the wildlife preserve. Around midday, the group split up at an old wooden boardwalk. Madison said she wanted to go a little farther to the lake overlook and would be back in 20 minutes. She took a backpack with water and a camera, put on her sneakers, and headed down the trail. Her friends waited for her at the main fork. 20 minutes passed, then 30. After an hour, the friends began to worry. They walked the path Madison had taken and reached the overlook. She wasn't there. They called her name, but there was no answer. They went back to the car, called Madison's parents, and then called emergency services. The search and rescue team arrived 2 hours later. It was a group of 8 people, park rangers and local volunteers who knew the swamps well. They began combing the area around the overlook. The Atchafalaya is a vast network of swamps, bayous, lakes, and flooded forests covering more than 350,000 hectares. The terrain is difficult and dangerous, with alligators, water snakes, and deep mud where a person can drown within minutes. The first piece of evidence was found the next day. At the water's edge, about 200 meters from the overlook, lay Madison's sneakers. Both shoes were placed neatly side by side, as if they had been deliberately taken off. Next to them was her backpack. One of the straps had been cut, not torn, but cut clean through. A smooth cut, as if made with a knife. Inside the backpack were water, a camera, and a wallet with her ID. Everything was there, except Madison herself. The search continued for 2 weeks. More people were brought in, boats were deployed, and all accessible areas of the swamp within several kilometers were searched. Waterways, small islands, and abandoned fishing shacks were checked. Local residents were questioned about whether anyone had seen the young woman that day. No one had. No tracks, no witnesses, nothing. After 10 days, the sheriff of St. Martin Parish, who was coordinating the search, held a press conference. He said that given the nature of the terrain, the fact that her shoes were found at the water's edge, and the lack of other evidence, the most likely explanation was that Madison had entered the water, possibly slipped, drowned, or been attacked by an alligator. Her body could have been carried away by the current or was lying on the bottom, buried in the mud. The chances of finding her alive after so much time were practically zero. Madison's parents refused to accept that. Her mother, Janet Reeves, told reporters that her daughter could swim, was careful, and would never have gone into the water without a reason. Her father, David Reeves, insisted the search continue, but the sheriff explained that resources were limited, everything possible had already been examined, and further searching made no sense. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. Madison Reeves was officially declared missing and presumed dead. The case was closed 3 months later. Her parents held a memorial service without a body and buried a symbolic coffin in the local cemetery. Life went on. Madison's friends graduated from high school and went on to different colleges. Her parents remained in their home in Brobridge, hoping that one day they would learn the truth. 2 years passed. On August 21, 2008, a truck driver named Carl DPR was driving along Highway 91, which runs along the northern edge of the Atchafalaya Reserve. It was around 7 a.m. The sun had just risen, and the heat hadn't set in yet. Carl was hauling a load of lumber to Lafayette, driving at about 50 miles per hour. On the side of the road, about 15 kilometers north of the town of Henderson, he noticed a figure. It was a girl. She was standing on the shoulder, swaying slightly, holding onto a road sign for support. At first, Carl thought she might be a drunk tourist or someone who'd been in an accident. He slowed down, pulled over, and climbed out of the cab. He walked toward the girl. What he saw made his blood run cold. The girl was severely emaciated. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones. Her cheeks were sunken, her eyes deeply set in their sockets. Her clothes were filthy and torn, a t-shirt and shorts covered in stains of dirt, mold, and dried blood. Her feet were bare, scratched, and covered in insect bites, some of them festering. Her hands were the same, raw with cuts and abrasions. Her hair was matted and tangled. She smelled strongly of a mix of sweat, dirt, and swamp water. Carl asked her what her name was, what had happened, and whether she needed help. The girl looked at him but didn't answer. Her mouth was slightly open. She was breathing heavily but made no sound. Carl repeated his questions more loudly. At the sound of his voice, the girl flinched, backed away, and nearly fell. Carl realized she either couldn't speak or was in severe shock. He called emergency services and explained the situation. An ambulance arrived about 15 minutes later. The paramedics examined the girl at the scene and decided she needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. Her condition was critical. She was dehydrated, exhausted, and possibly suffering from internal injuries. The girl was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the regional medical center in Lafayette. At the hospital, she underwent a full examination. The attending physician that day, Dr. Anna Landry, later testified that in 20 years of practice, she had never seen anything like it. The The girl weighed just 39 kilograms at a height of 165 centimeters. The normal weight for someone that height would be at least 55 kilograms. Her level of dehydration was critical. Her kidneys were functioning at their limit. Her body was covered in insect bites, from mosquitoes, gnats, possibly spiders, and many of them were infected. She was developing sepsis. But the most disturbing findings were on her hands and feet. Around her wrists and ankles were deep scars, old, healed, but clearly caused by something that had pressed into her skin for a long period of time. The scars were circular, as if the girl had worn tight restraints or ropes for months. Dr. Landry also examined her mouth. The girl's tongue was covered in scar tissue. There were also injuries on the roof of her mouth. It appeared that something had been forcibly and repeatedly pushed into her mouth, causing damage to the mucous membranes and the formation of scars. Attempts to speak with the girl were unsuccessful. She didn't make a sound. She only stared at the doctors with wide, terrified eyes. If anyone approached her too quickly, she pressed herself into the bed, covered her face with her hands, and began to shake. Dr. Landry called in psychiatrist Dr. Mark LeBlanc. After an initial evaluation, he diagnosed her with psychogenic mutism, an inability to speak caused by severe psychological trauma. Police arrived about an hour later. Detective Roger Castill from the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office attempted to question the girl. He asked simple questions and instructed her to nod her head, yes or no. The girl responded weakly, nodding at times. Other times, she simply stared. When asked if she knew her own name, she did not respond. When asked if she remembered where she came from, she also did not respond. The girl had no identification and no personal belongings other than the clothes she was wearing. Detective Castill photographed her and submitted the images to the missing persons database. 2 days later, a response came back. A match had been found. The girl was Madison Reeves, who had disappeared 2 years earlier in the Atchafalaya swamps. The photographs were compared. The facial features matched, even though the girl had changed dramatically, emaciated and aged beyond her years. A DNA test was conducted using samples from her parents. The results confirmed it. She was Madison Reeves. Her parents were called to the hospital. Janet Reeves later told reporters that at first she didn't recognize her daughter when she saw her. Madison looked like a ghost, wasted away, lifeless, with an empty stare. Janet walked over to her, hugged her, and began to cry. Madison did not hug her back. She didn't cry. She just sat there motionless, like a doll. She didn't say a word, not even an attempt to speak. Her mother talked to her, asked what had happened, where she had been. But Madison just stared at a single point and did not react. Detective Castill began the investigation. The first question was, where had Madison spent the last 2 years? Doctors confirmed she could not have survived living on the streets that entire time. The pattern of injuries and the level of starvation indicated that she had been held captive, her movements restricted, and that she had not received normal nutrition. The scars on her wrists and ankles indicated that she had been restrained. The injuries inside her mouth suggested that her mouth had been gagged or that she had been forcibly silenced. Detective Castillo tried to get at least some information out of Madison. He brought paper and pencils to the hospital and asked her to draw something, where she had been, the person who had held her captive, anything at all. With trembling hands, Madison took a pencil and began to draw. The drawing was simple, almost childlike, but clear. She drew a cabin on stilts, surrounded by water and trees. Then she drew a man, rough outlines, a male figure, tall. Next, she drew herself chained to a post inside the cabin. Castillo asked her to add more details. Madison drew slowly, with long pauses, as if each memory caused her pain. She drew a boat. She drew the man bringing food. She drew herself trying to escape, but the chain holding her back. She drew the man stuffing cloth into her mouth and tying it behind her head. Some of the drawings were too horrifying, depictions of violence, blood, and fear. Castillo stopped her and told her that it was enough, that he understood. Based on the drawings and the doctor's findings, investigators reached a conclusion. Madison had been abducted 2 years earlier, most likely on the very day she disappeared. Her captor had taken her to a remote cabin deep in the swamps, where he held her prisoner, chained her up, and deprived her of the ability to speak or escape. From time to time, he returned to bring her minimal food and assaulted her. The medical examination confirmed repeated sexual abuse over a long period of time. Castillo began searching for suspects. He combed through files of missing girls in the region from the past 10 years, as well as cases involving assaults and abductions. He interviewed locals, fishermen, poachers, anyone who knew the swamps, anyone who had cabins or hideouts there. Several names came up, but one stood out. Royce Blanchard, 49 years old, a local fisherman and poacher. Blanchard lived in a trailer on the outskirts of the town of Pierre Part, along one of the river channels. Locals described him as a strange, withdrawn man who avoided contact with others. He worked as a fisherman but made most of his money through poaching. He illegally hunted alligators and sold their hides and meat. He had been caught several times and fined, but had never faced serious consequences. There was more. In 1996, Blanchard was arrested for assaulting a woman. He had encountered a female tourist on one of the nature reserve's trails and attempted to drag her into his boat. The woman managed to break free, escaped, and reported the incident to police. Blanchard was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 2 years of probation. In 2001, he was arrested again, this time for unlawful imprisonment. He had hired a laborer to help him fish, then refused to let him leave and threatened him with a weapon. The worker escaped after 3 days and went to the police. Blanchard was sentenced to 1 year in prison and released in 2002. Castillo determined that Blanchard fit the profile. He had access to the swamps, intimate knowledge of the area, owned a boat, and had a history of violence and unlawful confinement. The detective drove to Pierre Park to Blanchard's trailer. It was empty. The door stood open, and the inside was in disarray. Neighbors said they hadn't seen Blanchard for a month or more. He had disappeared in late July without telling anyone. Castillo obtained a search warrant. The trailer was searched, but there was little inside: old magazines, swamp maps, fishing gear. However, in a closet they found a box of photographs. Among them were pictures of a stilted cabin, taken from the inside. One photo showed a chain attached to a support beam. Another showed a gag, homemade from cloth and rope. The photos were old and faded, but it was clear they had been taken by Blanchard himself. They also found a map with a marked location: a swamp area deep inside the nature reserve, nearly inaccessible without roads or trails. Castillo organized an expedition. He assembled a team of 6 people: rangers, police officers, and forensic technicians. They used motorboats, forcing their way through narrow channels, through cypress forests, and past moss-covered islands. After 4 hours of travel, they found a cabin. It stood on stilts in the middle of a small lake, surrounded by dense brush, old and crooked, with plank walls and a roof made of rusted metal. They approached by boat and climbed up a shaky ladder. Inside, it was dark. The air smelled of mold, rot, and urine. There was a single room, about 200 square feet in size, with bare walls and a dirt floor covered with wooden boards. Against the back wall stood a support beam. A thick, rusty chain was fastened to it, with a collar at the end. The collar was made of metal and had a lock. Next to it lay the remains of clothing, rags that had once been a t-shirt and shorts. In one corner was a pile of trash, empty food cans, water bottles, and food packaging. A gag hung on the wall, exactly like the one in the photo from the trailer. Forensic specialists collected samples: DNA from the clothing, the chain, and the gag. The analysis came back with a match. Madison Reeves' DNA was found on all of these items. In addition, male DNA was discovered that matched samples of Royce Blanchard stored in the database from his previous arrests. There was no longer any doubt. This was where Blanchard had held Madison captive for 2 years. But where was Blanchard himself? He was wanted across the state, then nationwide. Every possible location was checked: homes of relatives, acquaintances, places where he might hide. Nothing. Blanchard had vanished without a trace. 1 month after the cabin was discovered, his boat was found. It was drifting in one of the river channels, burned and nearly sunk. The boat was old, made of metal, with an outboard motor. The engine was destroyed by fire, the hull charred. The investigation determined that the boat had been deliberately set on fire. There were traces of gasoline, with the point of ignition located in the center. No remains were found inside. It was possible that Blanchard burned the boat and fled on foot. It was possible that he drowned and his body was carried away by the current. It was also possible that someone killed him and burned the boat to destroy evidence. The search continued for another 2 years, but yielded no results. Royce Blanchard remained missing. Officially, the kidnapping case of Madison Reeves remained open. The suspect was known but had never been arrested. Madison spent 3 months in the hospital. Doctors treated her physical injuries, helped her regain a healthy weight, and fought off infections. Psychiatrist Dr. LeBlanc worked with her daily, trying to help her regain her ability to speak. He explained to her parents that Madison's mutism was not caused by physical damage to her vocal cords, but by deep psychological trauma. For 2 years, she had been forced into silence and punished every time she tried to make a sound. Her brain developed a defense mechanism: complete suppression of speech. Recovery would take a long time, possibly years. For months after her return, Madison began to make sounds. At first, they were groans and sobs, then short noises that sounded like words but were unintelligible. After 6 months, she was able to say her first word: "Mom." Janet Reeves cried when she heard it. After a year, Madison was speaking in short sentences, slowly, with pauses, but clearly. After 2 years, her speech was almost fully restored, though some problems remained. Certain sounds were difficult for her, and under stress her voice would disappear again. Detective Castillo took her statement multiple times as her ability to speak improved. Madison described what she remembered from those 2 years. She said that on the day she disappeared, she had walked to the lookout point and was standing there, taking pictures of birds. Then she heard a sound behind her, turned around, and saw a man. He was tall and thin, with a tanned face and dirty clothes. He rushed toward her, grabbed her, covered her mouth with his hand, and dragged her toward the water. She tried to break free and scream, but his hand muffled her voice. He pulled her to a boat hidden in the brush, threw her inside, and tied her hands. He took her to a cabin. There, he locked the collar with a chain around her neck. He explained the rules. She was not allowed to say a word, not to scream, not to make any noise. If she broke the rules, she would be punished. He showed her a gag and told her he would use it every time she tried to make a sound. In the first days, Madison tried to speak. She begged him to let her go. She pleaded with him. He stuffed the gag into her mouth, tied it behind her head, and left her like that for hours. Breathing became difficult. She felt like she was suffocating. Panic set in. After several attempts, she stopped trying to speak. He came irregularly, sometimes every day, sometimes every 3 or 4 days. He brought water, canned food, bread. It was very little, just enough to keep her from starving. Sometimes he brought new clothes and forced her to change. He raped her regularly. In the first weeks, she tried to fight back, but he beat her, threatened to kill her, and eventually she gave up and stopped resisting. Time blurred. Days melted into one endless existence. She no longer knew how much time had passed. Weeks, months, years. The cabin had no windows, only gaps between the wooden planks where thin strips of light came through. She tried to count the days by the man's visits, but even that fell apart. She tried to think about her parents, her home, her future, but over time those thoughts began to feel unreal, like a dream that didn't belong to her anymore. The chain was long enough for her to reach the bucket that served as a toilet, in the corner where a pile of rags lay, her bed. But she could not leave the cabin or reach the water outside. She tried to break the chain, but it was too strong. She tried to remove the collar, but it was locked tight and cut into her neck. One day, she no longer knows exactly when, the man arrived in a strange state. He was nervous, hurried, stuffing things into a bag and muttering to himself. Madison didn't understand what was happening. Then he unlocked the chain, pulled the collar off her neck, and told her she was lucky, that he was leaving and she could disappear. He threw her a bottle of water, left the cabin, went down the steps, got into a boat, and drove away. Madison sat on the floor, unable to believe it was real. Then it hit her. She was free. She stood up, but her legs gave out, and she fell. She got up again and left the cabin. She went down the steps and into the water. The water was warm and murky. She waded through it, holding onto the posts, and reached the shore. From there, she pushed through the brush without knowing which direction she was going, just away from the cabin. She walked for a long time. She stumbled, fell, got back up, and kept going. She lost all sense of time. She drank water from puddles. She ate berries from bushes without knowing whether they were safe or poisonous. She slept on the ground under trees, waking up from insect bites and the cold. She walked and walked until she reached a road. She saw the asphalt and a road sign and thought it was a hallucination. Then she heard an engine, saw a truck, and realized it was real. She sat down by the roadside and waited. The truck stopped. After that, her memory is vague. Scales, a hospital, doctors, her parents. Madison's statement matched the evidence found in Blanchard's cabin and trailer. Investigators reached a final conclusion. Royce Blanchard abducted Madison Reeves on June 17, 2006. He held her captive for 2 years in a cabin in the Atchafalaya swamp. He physically and sexually abused her, deprived her of food, water, and freedom, and forced her into silence. Then, for unknown reasons, he released her in late July 2008 and disappeared. Why did he let her go? No one knows. Maybe he was afraid of being caught. Maybe he was tired and wanted to start over somewhere else. Maybe he felt guilt. Madison doesn't know. She is simply grateful that she survived. Royce Blanchard is still wanted to this day. From time to time, reports surface of possible sightings, sometimes in Texas, sometimes in Mississippi, sometimes in Alabama, but none have been confirmed. There is speculation that he is dead, that he drowned in the swamps, was killed by rival poachers, or took his own life, but his body has never been found. The case remains open. Madison Reeves lives with her parents in Brobridge. She completed high school through an external program, enrolled at a local college, and studied psychology. She wants to help other victims of abduction and violence, to share her experience, and to show that survival and recovery are possible. She occasionally gives interviews, tells her story, and hopes it will help others. Her speech has almost fully recovered, although in moments of severe stress, she sometimes loses her voice again and is unable to speak for hours or even days. Her psychiatrist says it is normal for trauma of this magnitude to leave lifelong scars. But Madison does not give up. She fights every day with her memories, her fears, and her past, with her fears and with what those 2 years of captivity left inside her. Her story shocked Louisiana and the entire southern United States. Journalists wrote articles, produced documentaries, and tried to understand how something like this could happen. How a girl could disappear from a popular tourist destination and be found only 2 years later. How her abductor could remain free. The authorities in the wildlife reserve increased patrols, installed cameras along the main trails, and introduced a rule requiring visitors to register before entering the reserve and to check out when leaving. But the swamps are vast. It is impossible to control everything. Madison's parents, Janet and David Reeves, turned their pain into action. They founded a nonprofit organization called Voice of Hope, which helps families of missing persons, provides support, organizes search efforts, and raises money for rewards for tips. Janet says they do not want other parents to go through what they went through. 2 years of uncertainty, hope, and despair. Madison rarely speaks about the details of those 2 years. She told the police what was essential, and her testimony was recorded on video, so it could be used in court if Blanchard is ever found. But in everyday life, she prefers not to revisit the details. A psychiatrist explains that this is a protective mechanism. The brain blocks the most traumatic memories so a person can go on living. Still, at night Madison has nightmares. She wakes up drenched in cold sweat, feeling the chain around her neck, the gag in her mouth, smelling the swamp and mold. Sometimes she wakes up unable to speak, not even trying, just lying there, shaking, until the fear fades. Her parents hear her, come to her room, hold her, and tell her that everything is okay, that she is home, that she is safe. She nods, but deep down she knows she will never feel completely safe, because Blanchard is still out there somewhere, and no one knows where. Detective Castillo continues to work the case. He regularly reviews new tips and follows reports of similar crimes in other states. He believes Blanchard will eventually be found. Maybe he will make a mistake, abduct someone else, and be caught. Maybe a witness will remember something important. Maybe a body will be found in the swamps, and the investigation will confirm it is Blanchard. Castillo does not give up hope, but the years pass, the leads grow cold. The search slowly loses priority. The case fades into the background, replaced by newer, more current investigations. Royce Blanchard becomes a legend. A chilling story told to tourists in the wildlife reserve about a deranged poacher who abducted people and held them in secret cabins deep in the swamps. Madison knows her story is not unique. She has read about other abductions, about girls and women who were held captive for years, sometimes decades. Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Dugard, the girls from Ariel Castro's house in Cleveland. They all survived, came back, and are trying to live their lives. Madison draws strength from their stories. She is inspired by their fight. She wants people to understand that abductions are real, that they don't happen only in movies but in real life, and that abductors do not always fit a stereotype. They are not always wild-eyed maniacs. Sometimes they are ordinary people who live nearby, work regular jobs, interact with others, and hide horrific secrets. She wants people, especially girls and women, to be careful, particularly in remote places. But the most important message Madison wants to share is this: you can survive, even after the worst nightmare, after years of captivity, pain, and humiliation. You can come back. You can heal. You can find the strength to keep living. It is hard. It is painful. It will take years. But it is possible. She is living proof. The story of Madison Reeves is a story of horror, but also a story of hope. Horror, because it shows how cruel people can be, how vulnerable we are in certain situations. Hope, because it shows the strength of the human spirit, the ability to survive, to fight, and not give up, even when everything seems hopeless. The Atchafalaya swamps remain mysterious and dangerous. Tourists still come, hike the trails, photograph birds and alligators. Fishermen continue to work. Poachers continue to break the law. And somewhere deep inside, in places that are hard to reach, old stilt cabins stand covered in moss, slowly falling apart. Some of them were once prisons for people like Madison. How many stories are still hidden in these swamps? How many people have disappeared and never returned? There are no answers,